Youth's energy and enthusiasm on the World Youth Day. The annual Hajj pilgrimage proceeds safely to the final stages as Muslims worldwide continue celebrating the Feast of Sacrifice. Saudi and Emirati leaders discussed the situation in Yemen following clashes in Aden that fractured their alliance. Welcome back. The news in details. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi today said the state is determined to continue its support to enable and prepare youth for the future in a way that guarantees a better future for the nation. In a tweet on social media sites marking World Youth Day, the president greeted Egypt's enthusiastic and promising youth, saying they were proving day after day that our great nation will remain strong and vigorous. The annual Hajj pilgrimage is proceeding safely on the first day of Tashriq following 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, which saw nearly 2.4 million pilgrims undertaking travels from one place to the other. Today, the pilgrims continued a stage that began yesterday and involved the symbolic ritual of stoning the devil. It is the last major ritual of the Hajj in Mina Valley near Mecca in western Saudi Arabia. After the stoning ritual, pilgrims return to the Grand Mosque in Mecca to perform a final tawaf or circling of the Kaaba. In Egypt, gardens and parks across the country received large crowds of citizens who are celebrating the second day of the Eid al-Adha, or the Feast of Sacrifice. Nile marinas are also major destinations for celebrating Egyptians who embark on long or short voyages across the Nile amid tight safety procedures. As part of Egyptian efforts to help resolve political crisis facing Sudan, an official delegation from the Forces of Freedom and Change Coalition in Sudan held a meeting in Cairo. The meeting will probe contentious issues between Sudanese factions. It comes as talks with the Sudanese Revolutionary Front were underway in the Egyptian capital. The delegation comprises Omar al-Dakhir, Ali al-Sanhouri, Madani Abbas, Babakr Raisal, Wagdi Saleh, and Kamal Ismail. Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz discussed the situation in Yemen with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, on Monday. The meeting in the region of Mecca came after the Saudi-led coalition intervened in Aden on Sunday in support of the Yemeni government after UAE-backed southern separatists effectively took over the port city, fracturing the alliance that had been battling the Iran-aligned Houthi movement. Meanwhile, the head of Yemen's separatist movement said he was ready to take part in Saudi-brokered peace talks after clashes with pro-government forces killed 40 people, including civilians in Aden. Southern Transitional Council leader Aidarus al-Zubaydi also said that he was committed to a ceasefire in Aden, where the separatists have seized the presidential palace and army camps. Meanwhile, Arab coalition forces fighting Iran-backed forces in Yemen said a new Houthi rebels' drone attack on Saudi cities was foiled. The coalition spokesman said it attacked Houthi targets in the northern Hajj province on Sunday, adding that stepped-up campaigns of missile and drone attacks by Houthis against Saudi Arabia are doomed to fail. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitor said Syrian regime forces seized the town of Al-Habit in Idlib's southern countryside in their first ground advance in the province since an escalation on the enclave more than 3 months ago. The Idlib area has escaped the control of President Bashar al-Assad's government since 2015 and is the last major basin of opposition to his regime and its allies. Amid the reports of Russian airstrikes, the observatory said anti-aircraft missiles had been activated at Russia's airbase in the neighboring coastal province of Latakia, targeting drones launched from the Idlib region. Tens of thousands of people have been displaced in recent weeks, and aid groups have warned that an all-out assault on Idlib could turn the current humanitarian emergency into a catastrophe. Indian security forces kept disputed Kashmir's biggest city of Srinagar largely locked down on Monday, the festival of Eid al-Adha, to prevent any major protests against a decision that scrapped the Himalayan region's special rights. After reducing the clampdown on the first day of the Eid yesterday in Muslim-majority Kashmir, which is claimed by Pakistan, India reimposed curfew after hundreds of people spilled onto the streets following prayers in the neighborhood of Sura. The clampdown on communications remained in place for an eighth day with no regular internet, cell phones or fixed-line links working. More than 300 regional leaders and activists remain in various forms of detention since India stripped autonomy from the territory last Monday. All flights in and out of Hong Kong were cancelled on Monday after thousands of pro-democracy protesters flooded the city's airport to denounce police violence. The abrupt shutdown at one of the world's busiest hubs came as the Chinese government signaled its rising anger at the protesters, denouncing some of the violent demonstrations as terrorism. The developments marked yet another dramatic escalation in a 10-week crisis that had already become the biggest challenge to Chinese rule of Hong Kong since the 1997 British handover. The UN rights chief intensified criticism of U.S. sanctions targeting Venezuela, condemning the latest measures as extremely broad, with the potential to exacerbate suffering among an already vulnerable population. Meanwhile, hundreds of Venezuelans gathered in Bolivar Square in Caracas to sign a document against U.S. sanctions imposed on Venezuela that the South American nation plans to present before the United Nations in September. The new sanctions announced by the Trump administration freeze all Venezuelan government assets in the U.S. and allows the U.S. Treasury Department to sanction any person, business or other entity assisting the Maduro administration. These were the political news. Now it's time for the business updates, where Goldman Sachs Group said that fears of the U.S.-China trade war leading to a recession are increasing. Goldman Sachs also cut its forecast for U.S. economic growth, warning that a trade deal between the world's two largest economies is unlikely before the 2020 presidential election. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump cast more doubt on chances for a trade deal with Beijing, signaling he might cancel talks set for September amid an intensifying U.S.-China trade war. The yen rose to its highest level in more than 1.5 years versus the dollar today, as investors ramped up bets the Japanese currency could gain more in the case of a prolonged China-U.S. trade conflict. Against the dollar, the yen climbed 0.5% to 105.15 yen, its highest level against the U.S. currency since March 2018, barring a flash crash in January this year. The yen is the top performer among its big rivals in global foreign exchange markets, rising 3% this month as investors have shown increased demand for Japanese government bonds after China weakened the yuan below 7 per dollar last week. Oil prices dipped on growth and trade worries, having risen sharply on Friday on a drop in European inventories and production cuts by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. International benchmark Brent crude futures were at $58.16 a barrel, down 37 cents from their previous settlement. U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures were at $53.89 a barrel, down 61 cents from their last close. Both benchmarks fell last week, with Brent losing more than 5% and WTI falling about 2%.